Today on Earth Focus, Planetary Boundaries. Professor Kevin Noone of the Stockholm Resilience Center identifies our planet's ecological limits and the consequences of crossing them. Coming up on Earth Focus.
Kevin Noone, what do you mean when you talk about the planet boundaries?
Well, the boundaries concept came from looking at how complex systems behave. So if you've got a system with lots of components that have lots of relationships, interactions with each other, they're hooked up in a complex way, those systems can behave in sort of unpredictable ways. You can push on them and push on them and push on them and nothing happens, and then suddenly you push a little bit more and a big transition happens, a big change occurs. So the boundaries concept started with looking at the planet as an example of a big, complex, tightly connected system, and asking the question, can we identify points at which that system is particularly sensitive? And if we push the system a little bit more, we can expect the possibility, anyway, of a large response, a big change. So the boundaries analysis looked at the planet and said, how many of these transitions can we actually identify? Can we quantify the point at which the risk becomes large, even more uncomfortably large, that we would go from one state to another? And then put a boundary on that and say, okay, if we remain on this particular side of this area of uncertainty, then we're probably safe or reasonably safe about not going into a transition. So when we started the analysis, we didn't know if we'd find any of these transition points, if we'd find 653. We found 9 that we could identify, and 7 of those 9 we can actually put numbers on, quantify. And they include things like climate, how much carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere, ocean acidification. Another one would be how much land we use for our purposes, how much fresh water we use for our purposes, how much nitrogen and phosphorus we cycle through the Earth system. One possible transition would be the irreversible loss of, say, the Greenland ice sheet. So if we warm the world up enough, then we might come to a point where even if we started to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, the Greenland ice sheet would destabilize. And you don't have to melt all that ice. You simply have to put it into the water, into the ocean, to raise sea levels. If all of the Greenland ice would be to be moved into the ocean, it would raise sea levels about 7 meters or so. Now think of that. There's a lot of us that live close to coasts. And 7 meters is a fair altitude. You'd have to relocate Bangladesh. Where would they go? I'm speculating now, but I can speculate that inevitably there would be conflict. Because if Bangladesh is underwater, where do the people who live there now go? They're going to go someplace. How do we accommodate that? We haven't been really accommodating of mass migrations in the past. So our historical example would be that's probably going to lead to conflicts. And it's not just Bangladesh, it's anybody that lives in coast. If you're in Groton, Connecticut, where are you going to go? So it's those sorts of consequences that we would have to adapt to. Those kinds of adaptations, they're big ones.
That kind of begs the question, do we have the collective governance this planet needs? Are we organized to make those decisions on a cooperative basis?
The governance system isn't up to the task at this point on a global level. We are still nation states. We're still a collection of nation states, and that nation state is an idea that's been around for a long time, and we've gotten quite comfortable with, and it hasn't before our generation, really been a big problem, because a lot of the impacts of our activities also were on the same scale. You know, until our generation, we've always been able to move someplace else if we manage to trash our local environment. And it hasn't been a problem, it hasn't been an issue. But I think now, with so many global issues and global threats, that our ability to govern ourselves on the global level just isn't where it needs to be at this point. What has given me some optimism in recent years is the increasing awareness of major corporate entities that they are important actors in a sustainable world, and that the sustainable business for them is important.
So you're saying that corporations may no longer be the problem, but they may be the solution.
Yes, environmentalism is good for business. It's a necessary component of a long-term strategy for anybody's business. I think, again, until this generation, until us, we didn't fully realize that we are living on one planet, that we've only got this place. There is no interplanetary insurance company that will pay us if we fail. And that realization means that we have to. It's not an option. We have to recognize that resources are limited to the planet that we've got, and make our corporate, make our economic, our well-being creation work with those resources. But in terms of resource use and for instance, this planetary boundaries concept, we need to get these things figured out in the next decade or two in order to minimize the risk of actually moving into a different state, one that we're not used to, that our societies would need to adapt largely to continue to exist. Historically, if we go far back in terms of our societal experience, our track record really isn't good at these transitions happening without a catastrophe to trigger them. But there are examples of actually major societal transitions without a really nasty catastrophe. We need to think about that. We need to think about how we can make that happen this time around without a catastrophe.
Kevin Noone, thank you very much.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.